Israel Keyes, who the Federal Bureau of Investigations described as a true ambush predator, has also been called the most meticulous serial killer of the 21st century.
Every time I make a drive somewhere, I'd be looking for places, good places to do stuff. At that point, I just knew, I just accepted. It was only a matter of time and opportunity before I did something again.
Israel Keyes was also a bank robber, an arsonist, a rapist, a murderer, a necrophiliac, and has even been considered a domestic terrorist. Keyes has also been called the traveling serial killer, though we call him the kill kit killer for burying supplies known as kill kits in various states, sometimes over a year in advance. The now deceased serial killer was a military veteran and a carpenter by trade who started his own company called Keyes Construction, where he specialized in building decks, kitchens, and the like. He is also known for his love of Wild and Mild cigars, coffee, and peanut butter Snickers candy bars, which he repeatedly requested or demanded from the FBI during his interrogations. Everyone thought Israel Keyes was a nice, upstanding, trustworthy father who ran his own construction business. He was just another friend, just another soldier, just another professional living with his girlfriend and daughter in a nice neighborhood with lawyers and judges for neighbors before he was arrested for the murder of Samantha Koenig. Unlike many spree and serial killers, Israel Keyes did not want notoriety for his crimes.
Right, my concern, the problem is nowadays, the more stuff my name is attached to, the more likely it is that somebody's going to try to do some kind of stupid person special, or, you know how it is nowadays, like with all this true crime bullshit that people are obsessed with, and that's, I'm not even so concerned at this point about, because so far I feel like we have been able to work within the guidelines of what we both said we would. But I am concerned about that, about some of them connecting the dots on this.
Before his death, Israel Keyes created 12 different drawings, 11 of which were of skulls, believed to represent his 11 victims. The 12th painting is believed to represent Israel Keyes himself. It is of Baphomet, an occult deity generally viewed as a symbol of Satanism. Keyes painted these with his own blood.
We believe there are 11 victims total, and that is based primarily on what Keyes told us. He was evasive, like you mentioned, he was very evasive at times during interviews, and he told us when we tried to pin him down on a number, he would say it was less than 12. But then there were things that he would say that led us to believe that by less than 12, he simply meant 11. And so he was quick to correct us in interviews if we had something wrong. So there were several times where we just threw out statements like, you are 11 victims, or things like that, and he didn't correct us. So based on that and some just additional things that he said, we believe the number is 11.
The FBI has been fairly consistent about their belief that Keyes had 11 victims. There has been a lot of speculation about Keyes' victim count being much higher than the 11 suspected victims. In 2013, the FBI's Newark division released an article that stated that Keyes admitted to burglarizing 20 to 30 homes throughout the United States and talked about committing arson as a means to cover up homicide. How many of those homes burned down? We're left with a lot of questions when it comes to Israel Keyes. The FBI indicated that Keyes likely committed his first murder at the age of 21 when he left the military, but before the birth of his daughter. Quote, Anchorage does not have any information suggesting Keyes killed anyone prior to 2001. The FBI also found thousands of photographs on a hard drive during their search of Keyes' residence. Using facial recognition software, it was determined that these images contained nearly 520 different people. These images were cross-referenced with the National Missing and Unidentified Persons System database. This resulted in 62 matches representing 45 missing persons. So for some missing people, there were multiple images that matched the same person. This is now known in this case as the NamUs 45. Previously, the NamUs 44. The FBI explained that Keyes would not search directly for a victim's name. What he would do is he spent hours on his computer going through missing persons cases from a specific region and an approximate time. As a result, most of the NamUs 45 have been ruled out as victims of Israel Keyes. However, he was caught directly searching a few of his victims' names on his computer. He is known as being an incredibly meticulous killer, but he also did slip up on occasion, and one of his victims was even identified because he typed her name into his computer. Keyes told investigators that he knew all of his victims' names because he would look at their IDs. The question is, why was he looking up these people's names? He may have been searching for news articles about his own victims and ended up looking at other results, or he may have simply been curious about missing persons stories. Some of the NamUs 45 went missing when Keyes was just a little kid, and one of them even went missing before Keyes was born, on the 7th of January 1978 in Cove, Utah. Israel Keyes was the second of 10 children for Heidi Hackinson and John Jeffrey Keyes. They were extremely religious. At the time, they were both Mormon, and then they moved to Utah together, where they had their first child, who they named America.